They knew something was wrong but acted too late. From Reddit user Foopack. My younger brother snapped and killed my mother and himself. He also tried and failed to go after my sisters, who were in the house at the time. Our entire family suffers from some degree of mental disorder. He was the one who suffered the most from it. And in retrospect, there was a lot of things that could have changed or prevented what happened. Our father ended up offing himself after he turned abusive towards my mother, and she moved and got a divorce. We were all pretty young, and my brother was only 2 years old, so he grew up without a father. Mother always had to work and provide for all of us, so we were left to our own devices for most part. My sisters and I would treat him pretty poorly. It started off as just being directed towards the youngest sibling, but grew from there to us always having a strained relationship. My youngest sister always used to get into spats with him, and both would always instigate arguments with one another. In time, he ended up growing isolated and was always the odd one out. He was hard to get along with and inherited our dad's short temper and stubbornness. When puberty hit, his mental illness got worse. He became more and more argumentative, and he became louder and more threatening. At one point, my mother ended up committing him to a children's psychiatric ward for a time. She was convinced that my father suffered from schizophrenia and that my brother had inherited that. In retrospect, I think it was truly a combination of anxiety, depression, and ADHD, all accelerated by his upbringing. Some time passed, and at one point, my mom found out that someone had broken into the basement. Nothing was stolen, but that was initiative enough for her to purchase a gun for self-defense. I don't remember the details, but at one point she gave him access to the key to the gun safe and forgot to take it back. One night he was being incredibly hard to deal with. My mom was at work and he was texting her and being a complete dick. She made the mistake of texting him flat out that she was going to have to commit him again. I still don't know why she made that decision. He had said before that he would kill himself before going back. That night, she went back home and everything was seemingly normal. At some point, he brought the gun out of his room. He shot and killed her in the kitchen. My sisters ran and hid in their rooms, locking their doors. He went upstairs to kill them as well, but he tried and failed to shoot the locks open. It was a .22 pistol. The door knobs were filled with holes, but he didn't get in. I'm still thankful that he gave up after failing to shoot the doors open. He could have easily kicked open the doors with no trouble, but he didn't think to do so. One of my sisters escaped from her window, but slipped on her way off the roof and broke her back, leaving her paraplegic. The other waited things out in her bedroom and called police. In the meantime, my brother had gone and shot himself in the bathroom. After some time, the SWAT team threw tear gas grenades through most of the windows and breached the house, finding the bodies and bringing a close to the night's violence. I was in my apartment, in another town, away at college. I woke up that night to someone hammering on my apartment call button for my unit. But I ignored it as I figured it was one of my idiot friends. When someone had let them into the building, I heard them hammering on my door. Imagine my surprise to find 3 police officers at my door in the middle of the night. My younger sister told them not to fill me in all at once, as I had to make my way down, and she was worried that I would be too emotionally charged to drive safely in the snow. In the end, the police drove me to my friend's house and they took me down to my hometown, where I learned all the grisly details. I met with my younger sister and we stayed the night at her boyfriend's family's house. We laid in bed crying, talking until the sun came up. Then we watched cartoons with the family's dogs in a light-hearted moment amidst the turmoil. I think I'll end the story here. There was a lot that could have changed the way things turned out, but of course, that's all in hindsight. Life does not allow do-overs, so we just have to keep moving forward with what has been given to us. Story number 2. He showed signs of psychosis. From Reddit user Non-Country for Men. My cousin always had problems. His mother abandoned him for several years when he was young, and his father was old school, spare the rod, spoil the kid, in a borderline abusive way. He got into drugs in a very early age and showed signs of psychosis as early as his late teens after he began using CPC. He began to talk about scenarios like he was the reincarnation of our dead grandfather's soul, and he was going to come collect our still living grandmother. When he began doing meth, he stole from his mother and stepfather. When he was 14, he gave me acid and told me it was just like weed. I was a shelter kid. He was never violent, but super inappropriate, with boundaries like breaking into family members' houses without asking while they weren't home and just chilling there, and other strange things like that. He rarely held down a job for more than a few months. He cleaned up, had a baby, and got some health care a year or two back. We thought he was doing better, but he relapsed on meth and shot into a car with 6 people in it. He killed 1 woman and injured 3. Story number 3. Her bruises and broken bones showed something was wrong. From Reddit user Nick Rotes. My dad's maternal grandmother shot her husband in the forehead with a .22 long before I was born. The warning signs were her having bruises and the occasional broken bone. My grandpa was an alcoholic. Apparently one day she was just waiting for him with the gun until he got home, all drunk and abusive. The round didn't fully penetrate for whatever reason, so he ended up being in the hospital for a couple of days before he finally died. She ended up spending some time in the funny farm and ended up babysitting me when I was 3 or 4 years old. Upon asking my dad if that didn't seem a little weird to him, he replied, "Nah, she loves you to death. She wouldn't do anything to harm you." Story number 4. He wanted to kill terrorists. From Reddit user Das. My cousin killed one of his classmates some years ago. He always struggled socially and did have some mental problems. For a year or so, he was taken away from normal school and put into a special program, which he hated. But about a full year prior to the murder, he changed a lot. He was in his adolescent years, and his eyes were open to all the terrors out in the world. Wars and such. It bothered him a lot. He would often talk about these kinds of things, about recent mass murders and such tragedies. He hated it. He really wanted to do something. That's why he killed. He needed to know what it was like. He wanted to go and fight terrorists as soon as he finished school. He knew a classmate who walked through the woods on his way home, so he had waited for him, and he jumped out and stabbed him as he walked by. He said he panicked when the victim started screaming, so he stabbed him over and over again. When he stabbed the guy, he panicked because he had envisioned a swift stab and the dude falling on the ground, not making a sound. The victim started screaming, however, and my cousin ended up robbing a woman of her car at gunpoint, was seen doing so, and was caught. Following the arrest, the police announced that they had been monitoring him, as he had contacted the police requesting they ship him out of the country, I can't remember which, where he could fight terrorists. He contacted the police rather than the military, as he knew for sure there was no chance with his mental problems. Plus, he knew he would be required to go through training. He also was gay, and seeing the way gays are treated in different countries really angered him as well. He knew of several terrorist groups who had specifically targeted gay people. Story number 5. Grandfather was a moody guy. From Reddit user LemonFake. My paternal grandparents died in a murder-suicide. My grandfather shot my grandmother in their kitchen and then went outside and hung himself on a tree. And my father discovered them when he got home from school. This all happened before I was born, and my father's side of the family wasn't really involved in my life until I was an adult. My mom divorced him when I was little, and I never met him. I didn't hear from my half-siblings and other people on the side until I was 18. I first heard about this from my mother when I was probably around 13. She said that my father told her this, but she didn't know whether it was true or not, as my father apparently was a compulsive liar. But when I got in touch with my half-siblings and my father's siblings later on, they confirmed it. This happened in late 1950s. According to them, my grandfather was always a very moody person. He would go days at a time not speaking to anyone and doing nothing but drinking alone. And he hated it when anyone would try to bother him or talk to him. My grandmother was very meek, a bit of a shut-in, and while she was affectionate to the family than my grandfather was, she also pretty much kept to herself and didn't do anything more than what she had to do for the kids. My father's siblings told me that there was domestic violence in their relationship, but the most emotion they ever saw my grandfather show was when he was screaming or hitting my grandmother after she would try to get him to eat or ask him for money to do grocery shopping or something small, and he would just snap, grab her and shake her, and start screaming at her why she wouldn't just leave him alone. The day this happened, my father's siblings told me was very strange. My grandfather joined them for breakfast, which was totally odd because he would never eat meals with them, and they remember very specifically that he thanked my grandmother when she put the plate down. Then he walked them to the bus stop and watched them get on the bus, waving at them as they left. They've told me that that's what they remember the most about that day, how nice and attentive he was, because it was so out of the ordinary. They have all said that they think he already knew what he was going to do that morning when they left for school. One of my father's sisters has told me that it wasn't even shocking that he would kill himself or their mother. The only thing surprising about it was that she never thought he'd shoot her. There was apparently some confusion about it because none of them even knew that he owned a gun, and that she always thought he'd end up strangling her to death or going too far while he was shaking her. Story number 6. Sometimes you can't tell. From Reddit user Sarcastic. My grandfather died and my grandmother remarried a pretty great guy, Ron. Ron had a brother, Robert. Ron and my grandmother lived in Louisiana, and we'd frequently drive down to visit them for Thanksgiving. My father, Ron, and Robert would go duck hunting, and we'd dig up some catfish. We played hide and seek with Ron while dinner was being cooked. I sat and talked with him about my life view as an 11-year-old. We ate dinner, drove back home, no issues. During the same time period, he picked up a drifter, killed her, and threw her body off a bridge. He eventually was caught, and his family was devastated. They tied him to 2 murders. When you read through his confession, the case is terrifying. There were times he came to visit while we all lived in Colorado Springs, and he killed people. He even sent letters to the police. The truth is, nobody could tell. There was no telling sign. As a kid, nothing seemed off about him. Even his own brother was shocked. Story number 7. Their relationship was abusive in many ways. From Reddit user Far Away 1555. My uncle murdered his wife while the kids were in the house. He shot her, cut her in half, then killed himself. There were a few signs. Every time I would visit them, you could tell he was having trouble with my aunt. They were always so passive-aggressive with each other. They took turns being the aggressor in their arguments. But I never suspected that he would murder her. They also had really loud sex. I found out later that they were into BDSM. But surprisingly, he was usually the submissive, according to their friends. Story number 8. Grandma was a huge racist. From Reddit user Stoken Nicholas 1. Technically, my grandmother is a non-convicted murderer, and it wasn't remotely unexpected to any of us. She grew up in a farming family that provided no monetary support to the clan. With over 1,000 acres, much of it woodland, they hosted multiple clan events and allowed them to hide out from the cops when the crackdowns began. I know for a fact that my grandmother and her husband were in the clan. They held multiple outdoor rallies behind the house I grew up in. There was also multiple lynchings held nearby. In the past, not during my lifetime that I was aware of. I loved growing up in that place, surrounded largely by virgin oak and pine forests. But once I learned the history of the place, I could never shake it. She was in her late 80s, incredibly racist, cruel, hateful, and frequently exhibits psychopathic symptoms by mocking the suffering of anyone she deems inferior. A few years ago, she was driving to a church meeting around sunset. She killed a 90-year-old man who was African American by hitting him with her car more than once. She claimed he was laying on the road, but that was clearly a lie. He was walking in the middle of it, and that she thought he was a trash bag. Upon impact, she then backed up over him in her truck with front and back tires. Obviously, he did not survive this. Notably, she avoided all criminal charges. She even kept her license. Yes, she is still driving till this day. She did, however, lose a civil case, and clearly said the following as she left the courtroom. Killing didn't used to be so expensive. I'm sorry for all of this. This is a true story. Growing up next to her was terrible, as you would expect. But I got out as soon as humanly possible. Story number 9. Dad was a domestic abuser. From Reddit user Bean Frinston. Here are the things I knew about my father as a child. He got angry when drunk, and was drunk as often as possible. He would try to find any possible fault with anybody to start a fight. In particular, he thought my mother was always doing things behind his back, and nobody really cared. His ex-wife, mother of my half-brother, called the police, and they didn't care about the domestic violence. My mother was an abused woman with a foreign name and mental health issues. Due to her family's upbringing, when she called the police, they sided with a drunk man. His family thought it was perfectly normal for a responsible adult to drink all the time and use physical violence against a woman. He regularly threatened to kill himself and also us. A gas explosion was one of his favorites, but he would also tie the belt around his neck. My mom was emotionally unstable to get rid of him until I was 18. It was a mix of stubbornness and luck that he didn't kill me instead. And frankly, I'm amazed that he didn't kill my mom. He tried to get rid of both of us when she was pregnant with me. I guess we were both a nuisance to him. When he killed his older son, my half-brother, I certainly wasn't surprised. I was and am sad about it, but not surprised. Stabbing my older half-brother in the heart while arguing about politics may have been an accident in the eyes of the law, but it's still despicable. Hey, Lonely Sickos here. Well, I just wanted to know what number of story did you guys like the most? I still have a lot of stories here, and I really wanted to figure out what type of topics you guys would be interested in. You guys can go ahead and leave me a comment down below. Planning on doing serial killers. I know it's been a little bit slow on the upload schedule, but trust me, things are gonna get better and I'm gonna be doing more videos for you guys. So please comment down below what you guys want to hear next. What stories are you guys interested in? And let's see if we can make it happen. Eat Oreos with milk.